Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg, and today we are joined by Tatiana Szulc. Welcome, Tatiana.
Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to hear your story. Why don't you start by just telling us who you are?
Sure. I am a first generation Latina. I was born to Colombian and Guatemalan parents. I'm a trauma and somatic therapist, and as well, I'm also a holistic coach. And I specialize in helping women primarily heal their nervous systems through a method called somatic experiencing. So, this is a method where you don't need to talk about your trauma or even remember your trauma in order to heal from it. And it's the same modality that helped me heal my own nervous system. And that's why I am so absolutely passionate about just spreading more awareness on somatic experiencing and the nervous system. And I've made it my life's mission to just let the entire world know about how important it is to heal the nervous system.
It really is, and we will dive into that later because it's fascinating. But let's start with your story and why you needed that healing in the first place. So let's jump back a little bit in time and tell us what was going on when you were feeling suicidal.
I was feeling suicidal during my teenage years. I should note that I'm a complex trauma survivor. So, really, that just means that I've experienced many, many, many traumatic experiences that led to a very dysregulated nervous system. And so I come from a family and a culture who doesn't really believe in mental health, and also come from a family who loved me very much and also was very emotionally unavailable and had their own traumas and also a lot of generational trauma. And because of their own wounds and their inability to be emotionally or healthy, I should say, a lot of their behaviors impacted my little nervous system, who just really needed safety and nurture and
Yeah.
love. So I grew up in a very chaotic household. I struggled with a lot of anxiety growing up. I was labeled as like the shy person, the shy,
Hmm.
right? And really what was happening was that I had this chronic anxiety, and my anxiety was so bad that I would experience a lot of psychosomatic symptoms. I would experience a lot of like stomach aches, a lot of headaches. I was always sick, and I would always be taken to the doctors. I've had numerous tests done, and doctors
Hmm.
couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And, in hindsight, well, the knowledge that I have now, I really understand that my nervous system was just chronically dysregulated. I had so much anxiety, but at the time, nobody really knew what was going on with me. And so, that impacted a lot of the way that they perceived my behaviors. And so, the anxiety, because it wasn't really addressed, it only got worse and worse. Later on, as I got older, I started to experience pretty significant social anxiety, but also anger. And, as a teenager, you're just figuring things out anyway, right? Without
Hmm.
all this stress and trauma. And so I was struggling pretty significantly with symptoms of depression and anxiety. During that time, I was also in a very abusive relationship, both physically and emotionally. And it was a difficult situation because it was one of those things where, they're the only person who really sees you and are quote unquote understands you, and the person who really I could lean on and talk about what was going on at home. And yet, this was also a person who was emotionally and physically hurting me as well. So I was struggling and
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. I started with self-harm. So I would scratch my arms, my face. And, people would ask about it and I would just lie and I would be like, oh, I don't know. I would make up a lie. But then it got to a point where I was like, I just really lost all hope and I didn't really want to continue to struggle with all of the things that were going on in my life. I didn't see a future for myself. I didn't see myself going to college or doing any of these things. I didn't want to. I was a dancer for 15 years, and during that time, I was forced to stop dancing. I was forced to quit
Hmm.
that, which was also one of my outlets.
Yeah.
It was hard. There was a lot going on all at once. And so that's really what was coming up for me during that time. And I definitely had a plan of how I would end my life and um, tell anyone about it. It was just something that I kept to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's generally how it is, right? We just keep it all bottled up, keep it to ourselves. And I say this all the time, but that's the stupid part of depression and suicidal ideology is that, we think we're the only ones. We think we're going to burden somebody else. Nobody else is going to understand, and we keep it all to ourselves, and that just makes it even worse.
It was a really difficult situation. I think because I was in an abusive relationship, I didn't really have any friends.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't have friends that I could talk to or I guess I had like acquaintances. I had people that I spoke to at school, but I didn't feel like I could trust them with
Right.
sharing what was
With
going
your
on.
deepest, darkest secrets. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so yeah, it was a really lonely
Yeah.
time for me. And even now, just like talking about it now and thinking back to those times, I'm getting a little shaky. Like I feel that in my throat. And it's like, wow, that seems like so long ago. It feels like a lifetime ago because my life is so completely different now. And yeah, it was hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So what changed?
What changed? Well, I had a guidance counselor who was forcing me to apply to college.
That's what they do.
That's what they do. And fortunately, so I mean, I'm a child of immigrants, so my parents didn't really know what the process of college was.
Right.
Um, I didn't really have any help with anything, so my guidance counselor was the only person who was really like, okay, this is what you have to do. You have to write a personal statement. You have to do XYZ. And fortunately, there was a program at the college that I went to that offered, it was a program for minorities
Okay.
where they offered, tuition support and you had to kind of do like this summer program in order to qualify to get into college. So it was
Okay.
actually just a really great opportunity to get into college if you're like a low income family or you didn't have the grades to get into
Right.
college. So that's what, I just did what I was told. I wasn't quote unquote better. I didn't feel better. It
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
something that I just like magically snapped out of it. But it was just something that I did, and I knew that my uh, partner at the time was not going to be going into that program. And so it was a way that I could separate myself from
Hmm.
this abusive relationship, and do what I quote unquote had to do. So that's really what happened. I went to college through this program. I was no longer in this relationship because we had to stay on campus during that summer program. It was a very strict program. You couldn't really, it wasn't like going to regular college.
Right. Right.
You had a lot more rules, I guess, and
Hmm.
expectations because this was like your only chance to get in to
Right.
college. So, anyway, during that time, I realized that things were starting to shift for me because I wasn't at home. where
Mm-hmm.
things were chaotic. I wasn't in this relationship that was abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to slowly make friends. And as I started to slowly make friends, I started to really gain that confidence of, like, wow, I can be myself. I can do things the way that I want to do them. It Because I had people that I could lean on, I didn't feel alone and I didn't feel like I had to stay in this relationship anymore. And over time, I grew that confidence to finally break up with this person. And it didn't obviously go well. It took many, many tries. It was not easy to get rid of this person. And but I had people to lean on. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think having that community was so significant in that period during that time in my life. And I decided that I wanted to understand myself. That's how I got into the world of psychology. I didn't really think I would become a therapist one day. I really just wanted to understand why I experienced the things that I experienced, why
Mm-hmm.
I still came out on the other side, even though I didn't feel um healed. I didn't feel like I was, I think about it now and I say like, oh, I came out on the other side. But during that time, I was like, why can I still function? Why can I still go to school? Why can I still laugh with my friends? Why can I still do certain things when I experienced all of these traumatic things and I don't feel I don't feel happy inside, but why can I still function in this way?
Right. Right.
And so I really just wanted to understand myself, and that's how I started to study psychology, the brain. I fell in love. I was like, this is fascinating. This makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. I started to put two and two together. I did really horribly, and I like to share this story because I want to give people hope and inspiration. I failed psychology 3 times, and this was psychology 101, by the way. This is like introductory to psychology. And I I failed a lot of classes. I was really struggled in school. I was drinking a lot during that time. I was partying a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
it's part of it is like, yes, this is kind of like the culture in college. But on the other hand, it was also something that I did to avoid everything that I was feeling.
Yeah.
And
Little
so
bit of numbing going on there.
yes, maybe a lot of it. Eventually, I would say by the time I got into my sophomore and junior year, I had a really big disruption in one of my friendships, and that led to taking school more seriously because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anyone to party with. Wasn't going out as much. I kind of lost some other friends when this disruption in this friendship happened. And so I started to put all of my focus and energy on school. And then as I started to really take school more seriously, I started to learn that I loved learning.
Yeah.
And then I ended up double majoring in human development and family science or family studies. And so I graduated with a double major. By that time, I knew that I wanted to become a therapist because I was like so into like the
Mm-hmm.
psychology, human development, the brain, the body, everything. And I absolutely loved it. And I knew that I wanted to help people who were like me. I wanted
Yeah.
to help people who seemed fine on the outside, but were really struggling on the inside. And I really just didn't want anyone to ever feel the way that I felt growing up. And so I really wanted to work with children and adolescents. And so I went into graduate school. By the way, during this time, I was still living in survival mode. Nothing had shifted for me internally. Wasn't seeing a therapist. I wasn't doing any kind of healing. So I was
You
in,
don't have time for that stuff when
I
you're
didn't,
in college. You've
didn't
got
have time for
school
that.
and friends and social life, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And grad school was it was one of the worst times for me. That's when my anxiety was at its peak. I was
Mm.
in chronic survival mode. I was on overdrive. I had so much social anxiety. I couldn't make any relationships at school because I was so anxious. I struggled significantly, but I graduated.
Good.
And I think, and so I was also 22, 23. I was also really young when I was getting my master's degree. And so I almost felt like I was living two different lives. I had to be almost professional and like I had to be a certain way at school and at my internships. And then on the weekends, I was partying and drinking and wasted. And a, it was hard to balance that. And your brain isn't fully developed until you're 26. So my brain
Mhm.
was definitely not fully developed, but also I had all these unresolved wounds and I was living in chronic survival mode. It was just a lot. I graduate from grad school. I am my first job as a therapist, and my only job, because now I work for myself. Um, I worked at a community mental health agency that I absolutely loved, but again, I was living in chronic survival mode. So I was always go, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle. I wanted to work with the highest risk clients. I worked with children, adolescents, and families, and I always asked my supervisor for more work. I was like, give me more, give me more. Until
Right. Because that way you have no time to think about yourself or take care of your own whatevers
exactly. Right? Like when you're so focused on other people, you don't have to focus on yourself
until it catches up with you.
until it catches up to you. And it caught up to me in 2020.
Everything stopped.
Everything stopped, everything shut down. I had no choice but to slow down, and we were all working from home, and I didn't know how to slow down, and I didn't know how to be with myself. And so I fell into burnout and I was dissociating on a regular basis. I felt really unfulfilled. I contemplated, I was like, do I want to be a therapist anymore? I felt hopeless. I felt powerless. I felt like, what am I doing with my life? It was really hard to go back to that why. Why did I become a therapist in the first place? I
Mhm.
couldn't connect with that anymore. And so my supervisor at the time, I told my supervisor what I was experiencing and she was amazing. She was like, "Well, you know what? Maybe you just need some inspiration."
Mm.
And I said, "Sure, let's go find some inspiration." And I wasn't thrilled about that answer, but started to Google body trainings and I came across somatic experiencing. And because I was very impulsive, I didn't do too much research and I was like, all right, let's do it.
Just
So
jump right in.
I signed up for this 3-year program and it absolutely changed my life. I
Wow.
didn't know what I was going into. I didn't know. I've done trainings in the past. I thought it
Yeah.
was just going to be like a regular training, and it wasn't. It truly changed my life. Like I said, I've lived in survival mode my entire life.
Mhm.
I have experienced suicidal ideation. I've been in deep depression. I've had low self-esteem, low confidence. I've had chronic anxiety. I've dissociated while I was driving. I've experienced all of the symptoms from fight, flight, and freeze. And I really just thought that this was going to be my life. And I thought I had to learn how to just cope.
Right.
And somatic experiencing showed me that there is a life outside of survival mode and it doesn't have to be this way forever.
Yeah. Amazing. Can you tell people what dissociating means for people who don't know?
Yes. So dissociation is on a spectrum, just like all symptoms, but zoning out is on the mild end of dissociation. So when you zone out and then maybe you're daydreaming, that could be a form of dissociation. So it's just disconnecting from your body, disconnecting from yourself, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum, like on the more severe end of the spectrum, is out of body experiences. So you might see yourself and you might be almost like observing yourself, doesn't feel like it's you. Or you might look at your body parts and it might not feel like your body parts. Um, or you can just lose track of time and things can go black and you're like, oh, how much time has gone by? I don't even know what just happened in that little gap, right? It
Right.
could have been 30 seconds, it could have been 10 whole minutes, right? Like you don't really know. So it's really just disconnecting from
Mhm.
your body and you kind of go somewhere else.
Okay. That sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, it was
Like kind of
very,
fascinating and weird if you could hold on those one of those moments and be like, "Ooh, interesting, what's happening right now?"
yeah,
But also it would be scary to do that and then come back and yeah, not know how much
yeah.
time has passed, what just happened. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was something that I experienced a lot. So in college, people would just label me as spacey. People just said, "Oh, she's just spacey," right? I used humor. Humor was my biggest coping skill, right? And I would laugh things off. I would make fun of myself. I would call myself spacey, and I would, try to avoid what was really happening. But there was this deep, deep, deep shame that came with not knowing what happened, not knowing where I went for I don't know how long, but it ended up getting worse. So I would dissociate while I was driving, and
Ooh.
that was really scary because I would dissociate while I had people in the passenger seat, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what just happened? There's a car," and I would almost like snap out of it. And
Ooh.
fortunately, I've never been in a car accident, knock on wood, but
Yeah,
it was
that's
scary in those moments and you can't control it.
wow. Okay. The just looking at your story, overall, it's really interesting that, you mentioned CPTSD, complex PTSD, and like everything that sort of led you to that hopelessness and darkness, it's not just one thing. And sometimes that happens with people. They have one terrible incident and they're like, I'm done. But sometimes, yeah, it's just so many little things or so many big things, depending on your life, that just add up and add up and add up until you're like, what's the point? And
Yeah.
then it was also a whole bunch of little things that sort of, well, I guess brought you back up from that pit. It wasn't just one thing. I mean, at the end we had the somatic experiencing, but little by little, going to college, leaving the relationship, getting out of your family home, learning to love learning, all of these little things that just sort of bring you back out.
Yeah,
And
1000%.
yeah, and I think that's part of, I guess, just being human, where we're looking for that answer, right? Like what when we're in it, we're like, what's the one thing that caused me to be here? And sometimes there isn't the one thing. And what do I need to do to get back out of it? Well, sometimes you have to do 25 things to get back out of it.
Right,
But yeah,
exactly.
changing your environment seemed to have been like a big thing.
Yeah, that was probably the most significant thing, um, because it felt very freeing. I think when I was experiencing those suicidal thoughts, I felt very trapped.
Hmm.
Right? Like I was stuck in this
Yeah.
situation and there's no way out. And I think that's a very common theme where it's like the only way out is if I end my life, right? Like that is the only way out. That's what it felt like.
Hmm.
But, going through that, it was very significant because it felt freeing. It was like, okay, now I can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, even though I wasn't, like I said, healed at the time. I didn't feel any better. Um, or all the way better, I should say. There was
Right.
a small shift of like, okay, well, now I don't feel as trapped as I
Mhm.
did before.
Right. Yeah. And there's always the people who are like, oh, well, you can move, but your problems will just come with you because, you're you and you're the problem kind of a thing. But sometimes you just need to get out of a situation or get out of the environment that you're in. And yeah, some of those problems still come with you because you're still a little bit messed up. But if you can get rid of those external factors, then, you have more ability to work on the internal ones.
Yeah, 1000%. Yeah. And right, I was still, even though I was out of that situation, I was still living in chronic survival mode. So yes, my
Mm.
problems did follow me, but there was a shift. something, it allowed me to go into school a little bit more and take school a little bit more seriously. And, I know that there's a lot of like, conflicting thoughts about education. Should I go to college? Should I not go to college? Right. But I think that for me, during that time, it was another way out. Like education was what helped me get to this healing or healed place, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Shoot, I was going to say something and totally forgot the advice that your supervisor gave you to go out and find something that inspires you.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't, we're not all going to necessarily end up taking a 3-year course in something, but even just those little things that make you happy, that bring you joy, that inspire you, whether it's, going for a walk somewhere that's beautiful that you love to be, or watching movies, going to the theater, or going to see a Broadway play, or whatever wherever you can find
Mhm.
that inspiration and something to look forward to, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's where those pieces lead us, and that's where you signed up for 3 years, so you're like, okay, I got this project for 3 years.
Yeah.
I'll just keep
1000%.
doing that until I'm done. And maybe it's buying tickets to a show, or planning to go visit a family member or a friend or something, do a little road trip, but just having those things that feel good.
Yeah, 1000%. And I'll be honest, I wasn't thrilled about this when she said it. I thought it was I was like, I'm not going to find inspiration. Like I don't even want to be here.
Mhm.
And but I
It
did it.
probably sounded really flippant, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just gonna
So,
be happy.
yes, right. During a time where I think so many people were struggling too. And so as a collective, we were all struggling because we were all home
Mhm.
and we couldn't leave our homes, or I mean, some people could, but it was a hard time. And so I wasn't happy about it. It wasn't something
Yeah.
that, I was actually looking forward to, but it was something that it was suggested. And so I took it and I was like, sure, let's do it. But again, to your point, I think that it is finding something that you could look forward to, and you never know what that might lead to. So
Mhm.
for me, it truly just changed my life. And you can run into someone when you go see a movie. You can, right? Like and it could change your life, or
Mhm.
something that could happen that could really change your life. It's like the butterfly effect, right? And yeah, I
I
think
always
it's
love to give the example of a friend of mine, when a couple of her kids had moved out, to go to college, and she was just empty nesting is really hard. And I don't think previous generations talked about it enough. I fell into a full-on depression when my kids moved out, and so did she. And so she was looking for that inspiration, and she was like, what do I like to do? Okay, I like to bake. So she made some sugar cookies and she decorated them, and she posted a picture on Facebook and was like, so this is what I'm doing to try to combat the depression. And and she's always been very artistic and creative. And everyone was like, oh my God, these are great. Can you make me some for my kid's birthday or various things? She now has like a full-on cookie business that she is like booked months and months in advance. And they're the most amazing cookies I've ever seen.
oh my
And
goodness.
this all started because of that, find something that makes you happy when you're not feeling it.
Right, right. And I think the other question probably that some people might have is like, well, how do I do that? How do I find that one thing that inspires me or makes me happy when I'm really not happy,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
And I
It's
think
like,
having that expectation that if we, whatever, bake cookies, we're not going to suddenly feel immense joy all of a
yeah,
sudden.
yeah, yeah,
We're
yeah,
it's just going to lift us out of the darkness for a little bit. And for that half an hour while we're measuring and mixing, we're not thinking about our problems.
totally, totally. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
It's
you've produced something at the end, and then you get that little feel good zhuzh from having created something.
like I accomplished something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When some days, showering is an
Mhm.
accomplishment, but we hate to give ourselves credit for that.
I
Yeah, but
know.
that's something we do every day, you know?
Yeah.
But if you can make or create something that's not like, a daily to-do list item, even though those are accomplishments, but
Yeah.
yeah, just
Those little wins every single
Mhm.
day. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give to somebody who is struggling to see a way forward right now?
Yeah. I think, coming from like a nervous system lens, I think that is it okay if I talk about depression a little bit
Yeah,
and like,
talk about whatever you want.
okay. Um, when we think about depression and we think about that hopelessness and powerlessness, so all of that really lives in the freeze state and right, like our survival states, fight, flight, freeze. Freeze is where we experience that burnout, dissociation, like I was talking about, depression, suicide, suicidal ideation, all of it. All right, low self-esteem. And so, what our body really needs in those moments is safety. What our body really needs is support. And so, for example, what you were saying about like finding those little moments of joy, those little moments of joy are creating safety in the body, right? And so, it's thinking about it's maybe you're not the kind of person that wants to make something with your hands, but how else can you create that safety in your body, right? Maybe it's just some gentle self-contact, right? Like
Mm.
a hand on your chest, a hand on your belly. Maybe it's a hug, right? A self-hug. And so it's creating that support that your body is really craving, that safety that your body is really craving to move out of that freeze state, to move out of that depressed state. And so naturally, what happens is, you know, when you get out of these states, you have a little bit more energy and you go into fight or flight, but it's continuing to support your body in those states so that we can return to a little bit more balanced state. So
Mhm.
my advice is really just to see how you can create more safety in the body.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's funny because people, would always talk about weighted blankets and how good they felt and everything. And when I first got mine, I hated it. Like I didn't hate it, but I was like, I don't get it. I don't understand. I couldn't sleep with it on because I felt hindered rolling over and I was like, I don't get what the deal is. And I don't know, several months ago, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to try this again. I hauled it out and put it on my bed. And I probably was like having a day, where I was just like, I just need a little extra something. Crawled into bed and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the best thing. I get it now. And I'd been having trouble sleeping because of anxiety and worry and hormones and all kinds of stuff. I have slept so much better since sleeping with my weighted blanket every night. And I think that's why. It's just because of that. It makes my body feel safe to have that weight on me.
Yeah,
So
I
it
love
doesn't
that.
always stop the brain from spinning, but
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. No, I love that. And I love how you said that you didn't like it at first because I think that's important. Just because you try something once and you didn't like it at first doesn't mean that you'll never like it. So again, maybe wait a few more months and see if you can try that same thing again. And your body's always changing, your likes are always changing, your dislikes are always changing. And so nothing is ever going to be one way forever. And so, yeah, giving it a little bit another try if you need to.
yeah, yeah. Just like today, I was saying, somebody asked me if I like Earl Grey tea, and I'm like, ew, no. And then I was like, wait a second, I haven't tried it in a really long time. So I'm like, maybe I just need to try it again.
Yeah.
And we do that with food and drinks,
Yeah.
and we can do that with everything.
Yeah.
Just try it again or not. If you decide you really don't like something, that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, coming back and sort of spiraling through things is often a good way to grow.
Yeah, 1000%. And, even just talking about this now and as I said, nothing is one way forever. I
Hmm.
think it's important to keep that in mind about your feelings, your emotions, your sensations, right? Like nothing is one way forever, and your emotions are meant to flow in and out, and
Hmm.
you're not going to feel this way forever. And that is a guarantee. That's just how
Yes.
our body works. Our bodies aren't meant to be in one state forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And our brain will try to tell us that, you're just going to feel like this forever, but you're not. I mean, and this podcast is a testament to that. Like every single person I've talked to over the last however long it's been, we've all been at that place and we've all changed and grown and created beautiful lives. So, yeah, don't give up.
Oh, no.
Thank you for being here, Tatiana. I loved your story and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.